Hi everyone, welcome back to Tazeen TV, and I'm so delighted to bring you part 2 of The Modern Woman and the Menopause. Now, joining me today, we have gorgeous Debbie Lewis, a functional medicine and nutritionist specialist. Debbie, you're currently at the Welsh borders, I believe?
That's right, I'm here in between Hereford and Abergavenny and the beautiful Welsh borders today.
Oh, how fabulous, particularly in this autumnal sunshine.
Yeah, lovely.
We also have joining us Sarah Davison. Now, Sarah, you're a natural menopause specialist and you've got a sort of homeopathic hat that you wear, currently based in London, I believe.
Yes, Paddington, right in the middle. Lovely to be here.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. And we have the lovely Leora Leboff, women's health therapist, currently in Hertfordshire. How's the weather you're in, Leora? Good?
Yes, actually after this I'm planning to trudge out into the autumn sunshine.
Beautiful. We had it all foggy this morning. It was just mystical. So yeah, thank you again for joining me, ladies. Now, modern women and the menopause. All of you specialise in that. And there is quite a lot that I want to cover with you. Obviously, we're going to be looking at what menopause means for modern women today. Because of course it was different for our mothers and grandmothers, and it's going to be different for our daughters. But right now, we're sort of paving the way, and I imagine a lot of things are coming up for women at this crucial period in their life. I obviously want to look at food, Debbie, in a lot of detail. I've done my own reading about the food industry and feel much more knowledgeable than a few years ago on food choices. And Sarah, Leora, really the learning about women's bodies and how we can support ourselves better. And, you know, the intention for all of you watching is to leave this conversation more enlightened, more informed, so that you can start to reflect more deeply on some of the choices that you're making, and hopefully offer you some ways to make this phase of your life slightly easier, or at least to be able to go and ask the right questions to your doctor that you may not have considered before. So let's kick off. I just want to check in with each of you on when I talk about modern woman and the menopause. I mean, it's such a big term, but what comes up for you? So Debbie, why don't you kick off? Like, women that you're meeting in your clinic, what are the issues coming up for them?
Well, I think probably, I suppose, very similar to many, or everybody who comes to my clinic, they come with a problem, essentially. So I'm very sort of conscious that I see the women for whom their menopause symptoms are problematic. And one thing I'm always really clear with on some women when they're talking about approaching menopause in that perimenopausal period is that for some women, it's totally fine. You know, they go through that transition, it's okay. But what I do see is a lot of women that come to me with really significant symptoms that are really affecting their daily life. They affect how they function, they're affecting how they sleep, how they get on with their partners or children. And it can be incredibly challenging, actually. Women come to me from a place where they feel like they're really struggling and often very desperate. You know, they've tried many things and they just have not been able to find the support that they need.
Sarah, what about yourself? What are you experiencing?
Yeah, similar to Debbie. Yeah, I see that, and I also see that I think stress has an enormous impact on women's experience of menopause, and particularly perimenopause. I call perimenopause the hidden saboteur, because there's so much ignorance about it. A lot of women, I hadn't heard of perimenopause and what that is. And I think the amount of stress in modern women's lives can either kick them into it earlier or just make the whole experience much more difficult because of the relationship that goes on between our stress glands that produce our stress hormones and their role in picking up the slack on the production of sex hormones when the ovaries wind down. And I think that causes a lot of issues. And certainly it was my personal experience, you know, when I first went into perimenopause 12 years ago or something.
Thank you, Sarah. And there's a few things that you've mentioned that I will come back to, but Leora, I'd love to hear from you too, like the women that you're treating. What is coming up for us modern women?
Yeah, well, it's fascinating to hear from other modalities of what is coming up in clinics. So I guess I approach it from a slightly different angle, in that part of what I'm doing is, I guess, trying to rewrite the language of how we're approaching it. So, and this is not in any way to negate symptoms that women are experiencing in perimenopause and in menopause. I'm in perimenopause and I can tick all the boxes, you know, pretty much all the boxes for what comes up for us at this time. But the rewrite is to, rather than medicalize menopause and perimenopause, is to bring it into viewing it as a rite of passage and a time of transformation that asks us to look at how we've lived our life up to this point. So when we talk about symptoms, I try and shift the language to refer to them as manifestations, because our bodies are asking us to do something and to pay attention to something. So that is, so yes, in answer to your question, what I see in my clinic is everything that we all see. How devastating physically and mentally this time can feel, but reframing it into something that is a means of growth.
That's really beautiful. And actually, so part of what drove me to do this series is my own experience. And it's extraordinary because everything you've all touched upon came up. So first of all, I literally felt this huge journey of fertility with IVF cycles. Then just as I feel like I'm recovering from that sort of trauma of becoming a mother, if you like, and getting into the swing of things, healing from that, Debbie, I came to see you with, 8 years of IBS constantly. And it wasn't until I got a handle on food and really shifted the focus to understand how I can make better choices on what I'm eating, that things slowly started to shift with the second brain, the gut. But it was what you just discussed, both of you, Sarah and Leora, like, I always thought menopause, well, I'm too young. I'm not 50 yet. And yet there I was, through going to the doctor, being prescribed antidepressants, taken off with my tinnitus to do ear scans, brain scans in case I had a tumor in the ear, doing rheumatology tests because the muscles were all sort of falling apart. And it wasn't until I started to speak to ladies like yourself and research myself to realize, wait a minute. And I started charting my periods and symptoms. And then my intuition spoke through, which was like, this is all hormonal. This is nothing structurally wrong with the system, apart from realizing that actually perimenopause is starting for me in my early 40s. Mm-hmm. So let's get this myth of when we're entering this phase. Let's look at that. So again, with your clients, is 50 the right age for the menopause, or how should women think about this?
Well, I mean, clinically speaking, menopause is only one day in a woman's life, and this is one of the first things I educate women about, because it's this kind of nebulous thing of something that in women's minds that happens after 50, but actually it's one day in a woman's life, and it's the day when it's been 12 months since you've had a period, and that's when you're clinically considered that your ovaries have stopped producing eggs. It may not necessarily be like that. You might get a period or so after that, but that's the clinical day of menopause. And then after that, anything after that is postmenopause. Anything before that is perimenopause. So the average age for the clinical day of menopause is 51 in the UK, but perimenopausal symptoms can start up to 14 years earlier. So if you think about the fact that 51 is the average age of a woman to have that day of menopause, say you're a little earlier than average, so you might be having that day at 48 or 47, that puts you in your 30s potentially.
Which is art. I mean, that's extraordinary, right? Because women are having kids later.
Yes, that's another issue.
So we're literally having the kids and then being fixed, starting to experience this huge shift within our bodies.
Yeah.
Debbie, Leora.
Yeah, and another point of that is also, I think, part of the way we approach this idea of menopause, and particularly the medical model, is a very sort of one-size-fits-all way of looking at it. And within that, we have to remember that there is a huge diversity, not within just women, but within different ethnic groups, time of menopause, first menstruation, there's a lot of difference. And the other thing is that for some women, they may also experience an artificial menopause. So many women, for issues to do with surgery or hysterectomy or cancer treatment, they may well have their menopause, much earlier than we would see as it being a kind of natural progression through perimenopause to menopause. So I think that we really have to acknowledge that when we talk about menopause, we're not talking about one thing, right? There is a huge diversity of experience and actually what that means. And so we have to move away from this kind of one size fits all idea about what menopause is.
Beautiful. Yeah, Leora.
Yeah, I find that because it is a question, and it's a question because everyone needs boundaries. There's not many people that want to just float through this without having any boundaries. So the question that I ask women who are unsure about where they are, so yes, there might be cyclical changes and what the physical symptoms, but the one question that I start with is, how strong is your no? So when we reach perimenopause, our life no becomes really, really strong. So
you make me laugh. Carry on.
It's you just can't argue with that no. So it's life choices, it's friend choices, it's work choices. It just becomes so very, very clear. So when I'm talking to clients and I can hear how they're feeling about life, then we might start exploring perimenopause. But as Sarah says, medically, it is one day that you for 12 months haven't been bleeding. But
and yet on average, the average time, I mean, obviously you can read lots of different things in different places, but the average time that women experience symptoms through perimenopause and postmenopause is 8 years. So I think that's another thing that women don't realize. It's not just a couple of months or a year. For some, it depends how you deal with it and what state of health you go into it with.
Because at this time, issues that you've had in life, particularly medical issues that you've had in life, just to put it bluntly, they come and bite you on the bum now. This is when your body starts shrieking for you to take care of yourself. So.
And as you've said, also, I always talk about emotional issues coming up to bite you. So, I talk about with women, if you've kicked stuff under the carpet emotionally, and I love that thing of how strong is your no. I think that a lot of what comes up for women is boundary issues. And I don't know how true it is, but I've heard that estrogen makes us compliant. And that as it drops, we become less compliant. Now, obviously, we want estrogen to make us compliant, because when you're having kids, you don't want to have a bad day with your toddler and go, right, that's it, I'm off. You know, it's like that it's part of the nurturing instinct. But when it drops, I think, you know, this is why it becomes called the second spring, because women lift their head from childbearing, or if they haven't had children, just the estrogen levels are lower, they're less looking after other people's needs and going, okay, what do I want? And where, as you say, I love that. Where are my no's?
I love it, because recently I've been saying, do it yourself. So they're going to be having another potential 7 years of do it yourself.
I don't know if this if this feels real, but the ability, the will to pair socks while you're washing goes. It's like, I've been pairing socks for years. It's like, honestly, that's not going to happen anymore. But yeah, it's a lot deeper. It is much deeper. But if I can say that, how we are so blessed in that if we're still cycling, if we still have our period, we can use our premenstrual phase as a practice run for particularly perimenopause.
Mm.
So,
Leora, tell me more about that.
So coming at it from a cyclical point of view, and are bringing in the menstrual seasons, is this something that is familiar?
No, please go ahead.
So the menstrual seasons of winter being the time of menstruation, spring being the time of post-menstruation, pre-ovulation, summer ovulation, and autumn is the premenstruum. So if we take the flavours of each of those seasons and drop them into the menstrual cycle, then the autumn of our cycle, which is the most well-known, that's our premenstruum, and that gets a really bad rap. But actually, we're at our most discerning then. We're truth speakers then.
Mm.
And if we harness skillfully, when the will sometimes is to rage, actually sometimes that's righteous rage. So the best, the most useful time to listen to someone with their menstrual cycle is in their autumn, is in their premenstruum.
Mm. Can I just, what you've brought up, I feel is so key. So there's a lot actually that's coming up right now. I just attended a festival called Ray. It was an interfaith festival of online women from different spiritual and faith backgrounds, all addressing the divine feminine. Don't want to freak any of you out if you're not familiar with her yet. And it just really made this one reflect upon, you know, I started my career on the trading floor at Merrill Lynch, probably the most testosterone driven environment one could be on as a Muslim woman. Just go figure that one out for yourselves. You know, back in the 90s, how that would have gone down experientially. And what I've found over the years is this masculine culture that we've had to pave the way forward through with respect to work. And now, given that we're the child bearers, given that we now go through this phase, how there's a disconnect because it's not working and something needs to shift from the very way that our solar calendar is fixed, that came away from the agrarian moon-based calendar, where we as women connect much better with seasons, with cyclicality, and with that potential 28-day moon cycle that seems to absolutely harness, Leora, everything that you've just described. So I'm going to throw it out there to you. Like, I think you've hinted and touched on it already when you've talked about the medical system and this kind of like systemic patriarchy where, let's say, most of the research that is done for women are still done by men. And we're also subject to this like billion-dollar industry of food and big pharma. And so this awakening with the feminine, what does that bring to each of you?
I mean, I feel very sort of strongly that the power of a lot of the work that I do is actually really helping women understand some of the biochemistry around how their bodies work. And I feel that particularly in relationship to hormonal health, there's always been an approach of, well, let's just, if you've got a hormonal problem at any point in your kind of life, there's going to be an antidepressant or something to either replace or stop your cycle. And that has very much been the approach that's taken from, I see teenagers with painful periods to women in menopause with any type of hormone replacement therapy. And I think what I found fascinating, and I'm sure you'll understand this too, Leora, with your work, using some of Maisie Hill's work around, her book Period Power talks a lot about recognizing the cycle and tracking it, very similar to what Leora was saying. Most women that I talk to don't understand that when you're on the contraceptive pill, you don't ovulate. Like, this is not a period you're having. This is a withdrawal bleed as a result of the progesterone your pill coming out. So I really feel that we have to take back some of that power by actually understanding what is going on in our bodies. And I spend a lot of time going through that and explaining that to people.
And again, I just pause and reflect, even on that, Debbie, how we came to accept the way that, our mothers, for example, they would deem, well, women still are, Leora, what you were just describing, that autumnal phase, we're mad, you're bonkers, you're PMSing, you're about to get your period. And so that deep shame has got locked through generationally. And there is a lot of intergenerational healing that's coming up, thankfully, for a lot of women right now. And I feel this is probably at the real core of it, actually, which is, how did we all come to accept the pill, the chemical, as the fix?
I think it's because we live in a culture that reveres, actually glorifies youth and beauty. And this, I think, is a lot of what underlies women's fear about menopause. It's the beginning of the end. I have no value. That's when the identity crisis can come up. And yet, why? What I don't get is, well, I guess that's the reason why we give women accept taking synthetic hormones, because they want to stay in the youth and beauty period where they feel they have value, that they have accepted unconsciously. But, do we give synthetic hormones to pubescent girls to hurry them up into fertility? Do we run around giving flowers and trees chemicals to stop them dropping their leaves or their flowers? No. It's a natural phase, and it's a place where we come into our power. And I do wonder whether there's some issue there about feminine power. Well, I'll hand that over to Leora.
Yeah, I was just coming to Leora because I just wanted to say you're spot on there. I mean, in certain cultures and traditions, like the Native Americans, on their councils, it's predominantly the menopausal woman, or the I think they call her the crown. Is that the crow?
Yeah,
the crow that's really revered and invited for her wisdom, for her intuition, and for that connection with spirit that becomes so clear. And it brings me, and I really, Leora, want to throw this to you. In Sufism, Rumi talks about, let the Mary of your body give birth to the Jesus of your spirit. So if you can kind of bring that into your sharing and what that brings up for you.
So say it again. Let me absorb. Say the words again so I can really...
So Rumi, Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, he says, may the Mary of your body give birth to the Jesus of your spirit.
Yeah. So there's the mother and the healer. That's what I hear, is the mother and the healer, which we have in each of us, whether we're men or women. And there's I think there's something that I feel needs to be said. It's all about balance, and I guess working in the cyclical way is that each of us, whether we're male, female, whatever gender we fall under, we each have a divine masculine and we each have a divine feminine. And if we use the cycle, and if we use the life season cycle, if we see that there's a point in our menstrual cycle, but also in our life cycle, where we are more estrogen driven, and yes, that power and how popular, as you say, Sarah, estrogen is, it's sexy, it's acceptable. And we, in our estrogenic self, this is when we're feeling at our most alluring and want to be out in the world. So when we do, as we were saying earlier about the no, when we start saying no in our autumn, cyclical autumn, whether that is the premenstruum and when we're bleeding, or whether that is when we come into perimenopause and menopause, it's not popular. And it is a time where we are starting to be questioned on that. So that yang phase, if you could look at it as a yin and yang as well, so the yang phase of yes, and then the yin phase of no. It's all, and so the masculine of yang and the feminine of yin. So it's all about, to me, it's all about balance. So Mother Mary, Jesus, having the balance there. That's the message that I try and bring to clients and participants, is that it's all about balance.
Well, I love what you have on your website. Actually, you refer to Christina Northrop's, one of my favourites. I'm sure she is for all of us, actually. And you talk about the wisdom of the telling a story of crazy Aunt Carol throwing the leg of lamb out of the window to the consternation of her family. And you say on your website, I think Aunt Carol was becoming sane and had seen the light. It's a bloody struggle transforming into a different sort of self. And of course, menopause is tough. You've all talked about what it throws up, the emotional baggage that is undealt with, that's coming to, as you say, Leora, bite you on the bum. And it's messy. It does look like things are falling apart before you can piece them back together. Debbie, your work can be messy, because I've actually done a poo test.
Putting in a box for science.
Really messy. But I'm so grateful for that test, and the plan that came for it after. But clients that come to you, Debbie, tell us, like, okay, they got to do a poo test. I've already told you guys that much. But what else do you look at, and how can you help women and support them at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I do, the kind of lens that I look at women's hormonal health is always, for me, I see it through the whole spectrum, from menstruation up to menopause. And so for me, hormones are very much the canary in the coal mine, is how I look at them, because of the way that they are so regulated by the hypothalamus, and they work in such a kind of sophisticated, beautiful orchestra. The body really needs to be working well for this lovely symphony to sound right, essentially. And when the body isn't working right, our hormones are what we notice first of all, primarily, and we get really significant symptoms from them. So people will often come going, I've got a hormone problem, whether that's perimenopause or menstrual issues or fertility or painful periods. But my job actually, in the lens that I look at, is what is actually underneath all of this that means that the body is not functioning optimally. Because the hormones for me very often are a bit like the kind of, you know, the brown leaves on the top of the tree. And we can go, yeah, that tree doesn't look so good. I can see those leaves are brown. But what is causing that? Is that because it's not enough water, or it's not enough light, or it's in too much shade, or it's under too much stress? And those can be very different for each person. So I very much take a kind of individual approach, but I do really look at it as hormones being the canary in the coal mine. They're often not the things that need fixing. It's usually something else underneath that. And as from your experience, it may be their blood sugar regulation is poor, they may have poor gut health. Something else that I think is very underserved in women's health is checking things like thyroid conditions. Because for many women, you know, postpartum and also perimenopausally, a lot of those symptoms of a low functioning thyroid are also very similar to symptoms of estrogen dominance. So kind of increased weight gain, poor sleep, feeling anxious, feeling stressed. So I always check simple things like, has this woman got a good functioning thyroid levels? Are vitamin D levels good? If she's been bleeding heavily, for example, particularly in that perimenopausal phase, is she anemic? Like, there are some really, really simple things that often are not looked at and not addressed because we're just going, oh, this is menopausal, or, oh, you've got heavy periods, either take HRT or take the pill. So I think we really have to look at it from a much, much deeper level and in a much more sophisticated way.
Sarah, Leora, do you have anything to share to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really with you, Debbie. I think I love that term, canary in the coal mine. Is it okay if I steal that?
Yeah, I'm sure it's not mine.
Because that's exactly how I think about it. And I'd love to kind of continue on from where you started this conversation about digging much deeper. And yeah, I agree with all the things that you've said. As a homeopath, we're looking for other things as well. So for a homeopath, whether your issue is you know, hormonal or whatever, a homeopath will always look for any of 4 potential causes. So the first one is we go right back and we look at the inheritance, the ancestral factor, or what is in science these days called epigenetic. So it might sound a bit far-fetched, but science has actually confirmed for us that trauma in ancestry can affect our emotional and physical well-being several generations later. We may have no idea where it comes from. So I will always look at the ancestry for trauma, but I will also, as a homeopath, look at it for certain diseases. Now, when it comes to hormones, people who have maybe always been plagued by some kind of hormonal issue, they might also have had bladder issues, and there's a whole kind of dictionary of symptoms that go with this. They may have gonorrhea in the ancestral line. So, and you know, some clients say, well, I don't think I've got gonorrhea, and I asked my mother and she doesn't say there's no, but these things are kept secret, and it may be beyond family memory. And actually a homeopath doesn't have to have it confirmed, because they can see from what's in your health history and what's in recent generations whether there's a history of gonorrhea. So we're looking for that kind of thing. There are other diseases as well, but when we're talking about hormones, gonorrhea can have a real influence. And actually I have had experiences where people go, oh, no, definitely not gonorrhea in the family. And then they go and talk to, I'm thinking one person in particular, went and talked to her father, and he said, oh yeah, my grandmother, so her great-grandmother, had gonorrhea and was infertile because of it. And she had big hormonal issues. So that's the other thing. Then for a homeopath, we'll look at the constitution. So what physical, hormonal, emotional makeup were you born with? And then how did that change over the years due to life's woundings and experiences that you had? But that constitution will predispose you to certain weaknesses, physical and emotional. And then, of course, there's life triggers. So there's triggers in the ancestry, and then there's triggers in your life. So I've just recently actually heard back from a client who said she's seeing amazing results. And when I saw her about 2 weeks ago, she had perimenopausal rage, on antidepressants, terrible PMS, and she'd always had migraines and PMS issues. They just got a lot worse, as often happens in perimenopause. And what we did was we tracked it back to these migraines and hormonal issues had started after 2 cycles of a very strong acne drug called roaccutane. And it has a very heavy effect on the liver. And if the liver's not functioning properly, then one of the things that you may get from that is headaches, hormonal issues. I mean, the liver is so interconnected. So I'm looking for things like that. And then also for emotional stuff. So I had someone else come to me who'd had really bad postmenopausal symptoms. And when I asked her, when did she notice them starting? She said, well, they got worse in menopause, but actually I've had them ever since my husband died and left me with a tiny baby. And she, one of the main things that I'm treating with her is unresolved grief. And that can have a knock-on effect on hormones as well. And then, of course, everything that you specialize in, Debbie, is absolutely key. If you're not looking after all that food stuff, hydration, diet, exercise, sleep, then you're not going to get anywhere with anything.
I want to come back to lifestyle because I think that is key, particularly in the context of the modern woman. But we'll come back to that. Leora, what was coming up for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's just so heartening to be hearing Debbie and Sarah that we're all coming at it from such a similar perspective, but we're able to bring different skills to it. And I get, and Sarah, what you're describing about the holding of ancestral trauma and holding of trauma, that's where the body works. So the womb massage just absolutely it comes into its own because we're then given the chance to embody and experience and feel and release. There's the possibility of release these traumas that we're holding in our bodies. And if I very briefly explain how womb massage became so integral into my work, was because of my own experience of it. When I learned the womb and fertility massage, first of all, I was thinking this is going to be a great therapy to add to my toolkit, and that was it. But what it turned out to be was part of my healing journey after 10 years after a birth trauma, and I gave birth to my son 20 weeks into the pregnancy, and it turned out that experience, I was reliving every single cycle. So my pain was blinding. And that night when I gave birth to him, the pain was blinding. So I was literally reliving that birth every single month. And that was for nearly 10 years, until my teacher laid her hands over my womb and the tears started coming, and I worked with her, and my bleeds were like a thick, dark blood that I didn't know I had no idea at that point what a healthy bleed looked like after 10 years of bleeding thick, dark trauma blood, basically. So when I started with a nice, fresh, red bleed, it was like, okay, the trauma has passed. And so my body has been able to pass the trauma through in the safe hands of my teacher and mentor.
Leora, thank you for sharing that. And thank you. And I really get it. Weirdly enough, it's a funny thing, because you have to, I think, be receptive. And I think this comes back to what I shared about Mary. You can't force healing of trauma. Like, you can't sort of say, oh, I've got trauma I need to resolve. Where can I go? It's like, I remember I've spoken to you when we've booked in, actually, I've booked in to come and do a massage with you. Because I too lost a child prematurely at 24 weeks, a baby girl, Iman Alia Ahmed, who was born in the Maldives and buried there too, on the same day. And I get it. But I've also noticed such a resistance in it, because there's a fear that the floodgates are going to open. And it just brings me to that surrendering and trust spirit of Mary. And, you know, and this is why it does link into where we've got to today. And we can maybe come into lifestyle talk now, because when I lost the child, I was at Bloomberg, a hugely pressurized environment back then, waking up at 4 a.m. You know, it's linked to the stock market, so there's this constant volatility, and on a daily basis, and actually it's just over the years, and at the moment I'm doing this optimized training program, and pretty much 80% of it has been on the fundamentals: eating, moving, and sleeping. And I think there are so many different factors as to why we all as a race and a species have shifted away, that we almost have to retrain on these fundamentals. I think the digital revolution has not helped at all, particularly with sleep. And yeah, so with a history of endometriosis too, the fundamentals is where we need to move ourselves to. And Debbie, that's why your analogy is so beautiful, of having to go deep, because, you know, a tree can't stand tall on weak foundations. So yeah, tell me more about lifestyles and what we can do to support this, even if it does feel selfish, which then brings that no back even stronger, because women have often been quite subservient, actually, of having to manage everyone else's needs all the time. And maybe this is our natural body's way, like you were saying and exploring with us earlier, Leora, which is kind of the signs are coming up of what actually needs to be looked at. So Debbie, do you want to kick off with sort of the lifestyle, on the lifestyle management side, what you bring to your clients?
Yeah, there are 3 key areas that I really like to kind of dial into in women's health, and particularly in relationship to hormones. The first one of that is really having an impact on insulin in particular, and that's where the sort of food piece comes in. One issue that many women talk about perimenopausally is the weight gain that concerns them, and there's this sort of very conventional idea that this is just because the metabolism's slowing, because the hormones are slowing. But actually I think that possibly more significantly for many people, you know, within our cultures, we eat quite high carbohydrate diets and have had a lifetime of quite elevated insulin levels. And I think that often what we see perimenopausally in terms of weight gain is not just hormone slowing, but actually the long-term impact of what our way we've been feeding our bodies over time. Very similar to, you know, people get pre-diabetic from long-term high insulin levels. I think for many women, that's a very compounding component of what's happening perimenopausally. So in terms of food, I really shift people, and this is what I do generally in my clinic anyway, to a much more higher protein, higher fat diet, and much lower on the refined carbohydrates. And that's kind of very simply just the white stuff, you know. When we're adding in good levels of protein, we're not only kind of supporting the building blocks, but we're also really having an impact on our neurotransmitters, things like serotonin and dopamine, all made from amino acids, all coming from protein. So a really good supply of protein to the body is essential.
And can you just pause there? Sorry, Debbie, sure. I don't mean to interrupt, but I do want to talk about protein, given this movement of veganism. And I remember when I came to see you, I was actually quite horrified that your prescription was 3 portions of meat a day. I was like, what? Really? That's not what the fads are telling me at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. And just being clear on a portion, we're not talking like, you know, an 18-ounce T-bone at every meal. We're talking like a palm-sized portion of protein. And I do think that for some people, you know, and again, no one diet fits everybody, but in order to get the very best that you can out of a vegan or vegetarian protein source, that being beans, legumes, lentils, nuts and seeds, you need to have a great digestive system. So you really need to have good stomach acid, you need to have great absorption in the small intestine in order to break that down and make the most of it. And that doesn't mean that you can't, but you need a pretty good, healthy, well-resourced body to get on with it. And for many people, they don't, you know, because of the way they eat, the antibiotics that we've taken, the stress that we're under, we've really significantly compromised our digestive systems. So for many people, animal protein is actually the easiest way to get that into the body. And I often do recommend that to people if they're open to taking on some animal protein. The other thing that's beneficial is with many vegetarian vegan protein sources, we've also got carbohydrates. Not that carbohydrates are bad, but if we're really kind of looking to keep our insulin levels and blood sugar levels stable, we really want to make sure that we're also combining those kind of complex carbohydrates with really good protein and fat sources. So people can be eating like a lot of carbohydrates in their protein sources when they're not using animal protein. Not to say you can't, but you just need to make sure that you balance it with other types of good fats.
Give me some examples, Debbie, of good fats.
Yeah, so one thing that I find is really essential is omega-3. So, and primarily our best source of that is actually oily fish. There is some conversion from vegan sources and people take algae, but actually the conversion into things, particularly EPAs, is not great. So our preferred way is actually omega-3, and there are 2 things in that. You get DHEA, which is really, really significant in terms of our neurological and brain function. And for many women, again, a kind of perimenopausal symptom can be that they feel a bit foggy-headed and they're not thinking clearly. But often I test people's omega-3 levels and they are so deficient in DHA. It's like no one's brain's going to be working well. So many of us don't eat our oily fish, you know, and we're talking about 3 portions of oily fish a day just to sort of maintain good omega levels. The other thing is, you know, EPA is also just a very potent anti-inflammatory, and that's the other component of omega-3. So I love fish oil. We also really need to think about things like avocados, olive oil, nut butters, nuts and seeds, because this whole kind of cholesterol myth, you know, has been quite problematic for women's health. You know, it's really this idea that we want to kind of reduce cholesterol levels as low as we can get them. We forget that actually cholesterol is the backbone, it's the building block for all our sex hormones. So when we kind of use medications that really significantly drop our cholesterol levels down, we're having a direct impact on our body's ability to actually make the hormones that we need.
Yeah, I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, this year was the big shift for me diet-wise, and I kind of went on more of a keto diet, which brings in all the elements that you were saying. And I was astonished at the efficiency with which my body functions compared to the more heavily processed. And I kind of whittled down that there's actually only 2 aisles in the grocery store that I need to visit. All the others,
everything in the middle, don't go near it.
And again, it brings the book Food Fix to heart, which is this billion-dollar industry that we just unconsciously are consumers of.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, the herbs. Just quickly on vitamins and minerals, I mean, magnesium keeps coming up as a good booster for perimenopausal women, but are there any others that we need to think about, Debbie?
Well, people often, at the point where they've come to me, they've normally tried some sort of supplements. So everyone's heard of things like Vitex and Coash, you know, using magnesium, sage, those other types of things. And I always say to people, like, if that's worked for you, then great. You know, there's definitely a few contraindications if people have had cancer treatment, some things we avoid. But if you think about the fact that the hormones are the kind of canaries in the coal mine analogy, if you've got like 10 holes in your roof and the rain's coming in, if you just plug one of it with some Vitex, it's not going to work, right? And I think it again is very much coming back to this looking for the sort of the smoking gun, the one thing that's going to sort it, the one pill we can take, the one thing we can do. And we've just got to use our wisdom more than that, which is we know that just plugging one hole in a leaking roof is not going to make us feel better.
I think this is part of the instant gratification, quick culture, put a plaster on it and carry on machinery that we're sadly all part of.
And I've been encouraged to be part of, though, you know, like as women we've been funneled down this system from, you know, the point of menstruating, and then if we decide to have children, you know, we've been funneled through this process all the way along to just see that our body is a sort of a slightly misfunctioning system that just needs one pill that's going to sort it. And, you know, I think our job as educators is to really support women in their understanding about what is going on here. And when we understand what is going on, then we can go, great, I see there's 10 holes and I've got like 15 different ways that I can possibly utilize to fix that.
Beautiful. Sarah, Leora, lifestyle.
It'd be good if I could follow, because I want to kind of continue that thought that for me, it is definitely not one pill fixes everything. You really have to understand the individual case. You have to understand the multi-layered causality, and I think it needs what I call a blended approach. So I've created a program where they get that. So, you know, talking about the food and lifestyle question, because continuing from that, you know, I think it's really important, first of all, to assess where women are at. So within the program, for me, they do that with what's called a Dutch test, which is a 35 hormone test, so that you get a bigger indication. There are lots of symptoms and signs you can see without the test, but it helps also to have some figures. And I then, on my team, I have a functional nutritionist who does a customized nutritional plan for that person, and then they do homeopathic work with me. But then I also have a whole education section where they are educated, and it's like a menu of self-care options. So we look at exercise and the different ways you can address exercise. So, you know, for women who have got adrenal fatigue, which many women do in perimenopause particularly, and through menopause. I mean, for me, it's a particular weakness. It's my Achilles heel, and it's really teaching me to kind of dial back a little bit and not be so driven. And I think that's the case for many women. So the kind of education that I give women in the program is I bring in a menopause for yoga specialist. And this is about asanas or positions that help the hormonal flow, but also aren't all about, you know, do this one and that one. I mean, when I was really weak some years back, I couldn't even do more than one salute to the sun without just feeling too weak to continue. And that's why I also bring in a Qigong teacher, because that is just so gentle and so mindful. So I think, you know, it's about educating women about all levels of lifestyle and how they can change it to really fit where they're at and nurture themselves.
And Sarah, this is all part of your natural menopause transformation program, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll be sharing the link for anyone interested in that program. And I am actually quite astonished at some of the findings that you have shared. I mean, your internet says that in an observational study, 438 women across 8 countries were treated with homeopathy for hot flushes, 99% reporting disappearance or lessening of their symptoms. And, you know, you've already shared with a couple of examples of the power of this remedy that's been with us for years.
Yes.
Ancient ways of doing this that we've somehow abandoned, believing that the 80% of the grocery aisles are going to sort of all of our problems out. So yeah, happy to share that with our viewers. Leora.
Can I first say that it's so heartening, Debbie, to hear everything you're saying, and to Zine, your experience of ketogenic way of eating, because I chose to do that since August, and I've been absolutely blown away. It felt counterintuitive with the amount of protein and
fat.
But my digestion's improved, my energy's improved. It's really, I've been mind blown by it. So yes, it's really, really good to hear you come up to be sharing it from a functional medicine point of view. But yes, rest. Rest. That's really unpopular. That's really, really unpopular. And that's really where, as a real starting point with clients, simply because there's no space to rest. We never give ourselves space to rest. So one of the processes that I do offer, as well as the womb massage, is, it's called a menstrual medicine circle. So this is a process that has been born out of, that's only been taught by Red School, by Alexandra Pope and Shani Hila-Wurlitzer, and it's born out of the family constellations process. So it's allowing us to step into either our menstrual cycle, or the more work that I do with perimenopause and menopause women is to step into their life cycle and to be in that space. So you're in this kind of liminal space. So you're not being taken. You do go deep. You do go incredibly deep, but you're very aware the whole time. So we're in constant conversation while the process is happening, and you go in with an intention, and the wisdom that comes out of stepping through the different phases, whether it is the seasons of the menstrual cycle or the seasons of our life cycle, we glean, the information is gleaned. And what comes up so often is the pushing through, and what happens when we're forced to push through in this processing. So in this family constellation menstrual medicine process, the information that's received can then be taken back into their lived life, into their lived experience. And that is where I've seen changes, in menopause, where I've seen changes with PMDD, so the most severe form of premenstrual syndrome, which then translate to perimenopause. It's always been about not being able to rest, and where in the cycle we need it the most. So if we look at it from a life cycle perspective, we're being called to rest in perimenopause, and that's not popular.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of things really come up here. This phase of our lives, let's say from 35 to 55, right? That's 20 years. It covers most of the women who will go through, well, we all got to go through this, but the majority will fall in that time frame. It's a time when you're raising kids. If you've got elderly parents, you're looking after parents. Your career is probably coming into a more fruitful, the gravitas is accelerating, and you've got positions of seniority for many women in the workspace. And, I laugh actually, Leora, because when I observe my daughter's rabbits or any animal, I kind of feel maybe as a species, we need to learn from them. Learn about just the natural, and you're right. Like, I feel guilty to rest. What's that about? And I was really blown away, Leora, when you were talking about the womb, because one of my questions was, have we as women lost connection to our womb. And I say that because in a divine healing session to help shift some of the trauma that this one's had, there was an exercise where we were encouraged to meditate on each of the different chakras. And my head chakra was so light, open, overworked, you know, no problems there. But I really struggled to connect with my sacral chakra and come into the womb because of this locked trauma. And it just really awakened to just, you know, reconnecting with this part of the body is reconnecting me to a place that I've lost within myself. And I never, and the story I make up is that I'm not alone in this experience. This, you know, and I come back to let the Mary of your body. It's, you know, we are spirits and souls having a bodily experience. And it's this denial of the soul and spirit. You know, in corporates, you can't talk about spirituality. Well, why not? And so I just wanted to ask you, Leora, if you could tell us a bit more about these chambers, these 3 chambers, actually.
Yeah, it's really moving to hear you talk, Tazeen, because of the amount that is held, and it's our stories, and as we said earlier, it's our ancestral stories as well. So yeah, it's really moving to hear you talk.
Well, I'm blessed because in the tradition, the Sufi tradition, Kabir and Camille Helminski, who I've interviewed actually in this space, are my Sufi teachers. And through that community, what I've come to see is how we're just held in the womb of infinite compassion and mercy, and the immense I fail to even find the word, but reconnecting with our own womb and almost coming more into that child-like baby who's swimming in the darkness of their own mother's womb, and how just from hearing all of you today, it's almost this invitation to come back into the unknown and get really comfortable with that, which is kind of polar opposite to everything we've been we've been experienced to and conditioned with over the last 40, 50 years that we've been traversing on this planet.
Yeah. There's a powerful bit in that really resonated as you were talking then for me, Tazeen, as sort of older women that we have experience of birth trauma or loss of babies or sexual abuse or assault that really may have quite a significant impact on how we relate to our womb and how we feel about that. The other side of that is that we, even without birth loss and trauma or sexual assault or abuse, when I speak to a lot of young women, they are still incredibly disconnected from their womb. Like there's a kind of cultural disconnection that even without that permeates how women are encouraged to relate to their cycles from the point before, when they start having them before. And, an interesting thing for me as a mother of daughters, my eldest being 18, has been through sort of observing that process of menstruation, supporting them in it, helping them understand it, and to see that when you do that with young women, for them, their periods are just like, it's no big deal. There's no big period pain. There's no big trauma around it. It's a very kind of, they get a bit tired when they're bleeding, but apart from that, it's okay. They understand what's happening. And for me as a young woman, it was not like that at all. And there is some very sort of simple, basic education and support that we can give to young women and girls even before they start the point of bleeding that can have an impact on this stuff, you know, even before you get to the point of birth and children and birth loss and these other things that go with it.
This is so important, Debbie, because it came up actually with the interview with Dr. Ghazala Aziz Scott from the Marion Glute Clinic that, you know, we're both of Muslim origin or background, and the cultural beliefs that have been ingrained on or about the impurity of a woman in her bleed is, I think it transcends culture, maybe more pronounced in certain cultures, but this really is what I feel is starting to be explored, and it's great to talk to you women about it, because if we're being conditioned that you can't go into a mosque, you can't touch the holy book or sacred scriptures because you're dirty.
And you call it the curse in the English culture. We call it the curse. What is that? I met someone from an Indian culture and they said, oh no, we say, my friend is coming to stay.
But we are really blessed, because I know through my colleagues and other you know, other authors that are out there, there's a slew of books that have been coming out in recent years that support. You know, one of my colleagues, she's written a book that's for like 7 to 9-year-olds that just explains the language, that just gives simple language and makes it playful. And she's done one for girls and she's done one for boys, and there are other books that are coming out that are being taken into schools, that are being seen on school shelves, and you know, the taboos are beginning to break. And Tazeen, absolutely, I do see many clients who are working through the cultural, you know, it almost feels like abuse to the womb. It's abusive to our relationship with our wombs,
which is kind of ironic, given that it's the life-bearing force of our species. That's what.
What's that about?
Because it's terrifying. Because it is terrifying to a patriarchal society that this life-giving force is so powerful.
Yeah. And it's amazing how many women we ourselves have brought into the patriarchal society and are subconsciously supporting it. Ladies, honestly, I could do another hour easily. But actually, just speaking about men, what conversations can we have with men to help them get this too? Because it isn't just about us. You know, for a lot of men, they're bewildered and probably quite confused.
And a bit scared.
They get it yourself.
It's being honest. I'm going to sing the praises of my husband, because he's a businessman, so he's very yang. we make a good combination. We balance each other out. But what he has done for his understanding has been to create his own cycle chart while I do still have a cycle, and it's really cute. He's got this little tiny cutout of my picture. He puts it around the cycle to tell him what menstrual season I'm in. And you know, he's then navigating as well as my cycle's changing in perimenopause. He's then navigating and saying, oh, but But you've whizzed round to winter, you've whizzed round to your period, or hold on, but I thought you were in summer. It's like, okay, but no, it's changing. So he's getting this lived understanding of the cyclical nature of me, and you know, on this chart is written what he can expect. You know, what my emotional responses are likely to be at this time.
And then what comes up for me there actually is, again, this need to like claim it, understand it, know it for ourselves, to be able to share it
without
positively.
shame. Without shame.
That's exactly what was coming up.
Yeah, me too. And it made me think, you know, that you're a beautiful example of a couple, you know, we need to lead in this. We're the ones that know our bodies. And we need to lead and we need to educate. And to do that, we need to be able to speak about it. Not do this kind of see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, which what I say is a lot of women have that attitude to menopause. But actually, it's women's bodies in general, really.
Yeah, the other attitude there, Sarah, is when you tell people, oh, I'm going through perimenopause, oh, poor you. Yeah. Other women saying, poor
I know. Oh, terrible. I mean, I had a client, I mean, I treated her when she was done and dusted with menopause, but when we talked about menopause, she said that when she was probably perimenopausal without knowing it, but before that, she didn't even want to hear the word. You know, that's an extreme, but I don't think she's alone, because it has such a bad rap in our society, because we're all about youth and beauty and fertility.
As a counter to that fear, am I okay to show the life seasonal cycle?
Yeah, I really would love you to do that. But before, can I just quickly check in? I think Debbie had a few things to say off the bat, and then we'll definitely come to your chart.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the opportunity, Tazeen. I mean, my experience just really reflects others, particularly when I work with women around fertility. My experience is that when women start charting, start to get an idea of their cycles, their partners are so interested in it. They are like, let me understand. I don't understand. Tell me. So I actually feel like it's exactly what you said, Tazeen. Like, we have to be the leaders ourselves. We need to learn ourselves. We need to understand ourselves. And then we educate. And my experience is that men are really receptive to this stuff. They are properly interested. If they care about us and love us, they want to understand.
And I'd also add to that, we need to love ourselves, which kind of connects to everything we've all been sharing, which is that self-love, women supporting women, you know, because I think it's another myth of the modern woman and the culture we're in, that we have to go to our partners for everything. Actually, no, I can call a friend and talk to her about it, and he's off the hook. And that might be easier for him and easier for me.
Yeah.
So it's kind of encompassing, I think, all of this. But Leora, please do share with us this fabulous, beautiful chart.
It's let's pop that share screen. So I work in partnership with Kate Codrington, and we've developed Womankind. We've done all our training together over the years, and we have such a passion for sharing the work. We've done the leadership training with Red School, so we're taking it out there. And what's been absolutely beautiful has been, I'm in perimenopause. Kate is the other side of menopause. So we've been able to embody our lived experiences into the work that we're putting out there. And we've developed the life seasons circle, which takes us from menarche, so all the way round the life seasons, into our time of menarche at our first bleed, is our spring, all the way round into second spring, which gives us that feeling of empowerment that honestly menopause isn't where we end. we are coming out into a second spring. So really, really briefly, this takes us through the feel and the qualities of these times of our lives. So how tender and vulnerable we are as we enter those teenage years of menarche, and the imprint particularly, and this is what you've touched on, to say the imprint is often how we experience our menarche, and either people's responses to our first bleed or what's going on in our lives can follow us through and leave that imprint on our menstrual lives. So we've got this spring time of our life that is tender, is vulnerable, does need real protection. So for our daughters that need that protection, but it's also that time where we can be exploring new ideas, and there's the freshness of youth coming to how we're viewing things, into our life summer, which is motherhood. And that doesn't necessarily mean giving birth to children. It's giving birth to ideas, it's giving birth to businesses. It's that
Yeah, I was just about to say, sorry to interrupt, but something that really came to heart is when I put out there on Facebook that I'm going to be doing this series, a couple of women who've gone through it actually express it's the most liberating time of their lives. They no longer need to worry about the partner, the husband in the same way, or their kids. They could just really focus on the mission and mandate that is getting downloaded to them at this period in time of what their own soul mission is about.
Mm-hmm.
And they found it was really liberating.
Yeah. So yeah, and it is because we're in our fullness. We're in our summer fullness. We are putting ourselves out there. It's the yes. It's the time of yes. We've talked about the yes and no, and then heading into the autumn of perimenopause, where we start questioning, we start looking at boundaries, we start stepping into our authority and using absolute discernment, because we're just driven that way. You know, it's almost like an unstoppable force
Get it yourself. I get that.
Yeah. And it's where we hit then the 3 phases of menopause, which are separation, which tend to come in those perimenopausal years. And it's hard, you know, it's really, really hard. This is a time of grief. This is the skin shedding. This is the leaves falling from the tree. And so there's no spiritual bypassing. Having this knowledge and being able to bring this into our lives is empowering, but it doesn't take away from how potentially hard it is.
No, and I often reflect on the butterfly and the amount of blood and glory that chrysalis experiences before it breaks through. And I'm just beginning to glean that, or question why it would be different for us, you know.
If you were to open up that cocoon, open up that chrysalis, mush would come out. It's like we need to stay in that chrysalis. We need to stay in that cocoon for us to be able to come out the other side.
Beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I would say a lived experience. I've got 1 foot in separation, 1 foot in surrender, where I'm surrendering. We say that this is you're in the psychospiritual form of menopause, not the medical form, not the medical word of menopause. This is your winter, your life winter, which is a potential time of healing, because you're listening to what's coming up. But this is where the rest, you know, where we're called to rest, and when we're not resting, that's when our bodies and our psyches are screaming at us. And then there's that emergence. So, you know, you're just poking your head out of the duvet of winter, but staying with the trust that you're still in menopause, so you don't jump out too quickly, because you're going to just fall flat on your face. So it's, you know, it's still a very discerning time, that you're looking You're really taking care of these potential new shoots, but aren't ready to come out of the duvet in spring and spring into spring. But then if these phases are really taken care of, coming out into the second spring. And it was Kate that introduced me to the concept of second spring, which is a Chinese concept. It's because menopause is revered, hopefully still is, but is historically revered and respected in Chinese culture, and post-menopause is referred to as this time of stepping back into the tenderness, the vulnerability, but stepping into this newer version of yourself without the estrogen and without the people-pleasing yes of that estrogenic push. So it's a time of reverence in our life that makes it so clear that menopause is not the end.
I love this model, Leora, and I really recognize it in my own journey. So when I did perimenopause, it's gone now, but there was a separation and there was a no. I had been working for 14 years as a corporate innovation consultant, and it was full on. I loved the work, but a no came up, and that's when I changed my career to become a homeopath. It's the best thing I've ever done. So yeah, and I recognize all those stages, actually, the surrender, and yeah, that I think I'm starting to come in to my second spring now.
And that's really wonderful to hear. Your lived experience does match those.
Yeah, no, it works. I think the model's absolutely spot on.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Leora. It's so beautiful. I love pictures. They really work for me. And just to see the way that you put that together, it's really great. Thank you.
Yeah, Kate and I have developed it. Kate's the tech whiz of our partnership. So
yeah, it's powerful. Thank you.
To Kate.
Well, I just want to share with our viewers. So, I mean, you're hosting your Love Your Menopause Day retreats, and of course, they'll get access to your website through the blog. So keep an eye out for that, everyone. And do check on the blog for all the resource and links to these amazingly incredible women. Sarah, of course, we've mentioned about your retreat, your program that you're running at the moment on menopause. I just want to pull up actually, why don't you just quickly tell us the name of it again? Yes,
it's the Natural Menopause Transformation Program. And it's a blended program where you get, have I got time to pull up a slide quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Because it uses a particular method that I very simply call the AEIOU method, which is basically when you come into the program, you get the hormonal assessment with a customized nutritional plan, so that you've got that building block at the base to make sure that your lifestyle is right and you're eating the right things for your individual imbalance, because everybody's is different. Then you get the assessment with me, looking at all the ancestry, the life triggers, whatever it might be. And then education comes in the coaching with me, but also in a group setting where I bring in the different specialists, exercise specialists, mindset, mindfulness, nutrition, relationships, to give a self-care, menopause self-care menu that people can take away and use beyond the program. And then implement, obviously, no change happens without implements. You've got to take your medicine, your homeopathic medicines, and follow your plan, and, implement whatever you want to from the education part. And then for me, particularly observing and updating me on what you notice change when you take your homeopathic medicines, that then allows me to reassess. And that I put that all in a container of the program, which basically comprises a 6-month program where you get 6 months of individual homeopathic consultations and medicines, the tailored nutritional plan, and then you have the live fortnightly groups online that allow a sharing space as well. If women don't have a space to talk about what's going on for them, so many corporate women particularly, they can't mention it at work. because it might jeopardize their career. And then we have the experts come in. So yeah, that's a little bit about the program. Just these are the subjects that we cover in the education bit.
Beautiful.
I find relationships come up a lot as a problem. You know, that's where your no thing comes in, Leora. And sexuality, and we haven't mentioned sexuality, but you know, that comes up as a big issue often for people. Yeah, so that's the program.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. And I find it fascinating how these things can't be talked about in the corporate workplace. I remember being pregnant at Bloomberg and having to hide the fact that I'm pregnant. What's all that about? I'm giving life. Celebrate. Anyway, and in terms of speaking, I know that Leora has a space too of bringing women to have these conversations together. So that's really important that we have that. Debbie, just quickly, I know you do quite a few retreats as well. You were going to do one with Katie Appleton, who we've interviewed as well before, who does yoga. So yes.
Yeah, so we had a great retreat planned in Montenegro in March, where actually we were doing, it was actually specifically a women's health retreat, and the plan was over the week to kind of talk people through the biochemistry and all these bits we talked about today and have a physical practice. So we're really hoping, we were thinking next year to get this up and running again, but we will see. But it's definitely on our, you know, Katie Appleton and mine's mind to get that, you know, planned in again. And I very simply, I work one-to-one in clinic. Usually I have a clinic in Hereford and then one up in Marylebone, but at the moment I'm just working online.
Well, I just want to say a very big thank you to you, Debbie, because thanks to the one-to-one session that I had with you today, I've got good poo. That's something else to celebrate. Healthy poo, not to be underestimated, given the fact that our gut is our second brain.
Yeah, nice work. It's a good poo day.
That's a whole other topic. And Leora, I really look forward to massage with you. And Sarah, thank you so much. I may be reaching out to you personally. So if no one else finds it helpful, doesn't matter. I have found this extremely helpful. So ladies, thank you so much for your time today. And just to remind you all that all of the information with their web links will be included. So do look out for those. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. It's been a great conversation to meet everybody.
Brilliant to share the space.
Thanks, Hazine, for actually creating a platform for this. It's so important.
Yes. Thank you, ladies. Thank you for your time and wisdom. Thank you.